Every time I go and visit my son's grave, it brings me so much peace because I know that I'll get to see him again, and that when he left this world, it was just the natural transition into things. And I'm so grateful that even though I got to spend an amazing hour with him, it won't be the end. I'll get to spend all eternity with him. Me and my husband were so excited to find out what we were having, and typically you find out about 18 weeks or just before that. So we went into my ultrasound and we were so excited. My kids were thrilled. We kept going back and forth on whether it was a boy or a girl. I was actually really nervous because before then I kept feeling like something was wrong. I wasn't quite sure, but I thought hopefully it's just the mother jitters and you're always paranoid that something isn't right. But what was different about this one is she kept having me move to different positions, and then halfway through she actually had me go to the bathroom and come back and do some more measurements. So I was a little concerned, but then she's like, well, do you guys want to find out what you're having? And we're like, yeah, of course. And she's like, you're having a little boy. And we were so excited, especially Evan, his little baby brother. And so all my fears just seemed to wash away because I knew she didn't say anything was wrong and that it was as far as I knew, a healthy baby boy. And when we got home, I went and checked my phone and I had a missed call from my doctor. And sure enough, the doctor had looked over the ultrasound results and found some things that he didn't necessarily like with the measurements, especially with his head. So I was so upset. So it seemed like for an eternity before I was able to actually get on the phone with a doctor. Indeed, some of the measurements weren't quite measuring up. He was actually measuring smaller than he should be, his arms and legs, and his head was measuring bigger than it should be. So again, another wait for eternity, and the doctor came in and she informed us, she informed us that he had it's called thanatophoric dysplasia, which is a very rare genetic disorder. It happens to 1 in 60,000 children, but ours had type 2, which happens to 1 in 100,000 children. And it's just the gene that makes dwarf babies was slightly mutated. And the doctor, gave us as much information as she could in that brief period of time, and she said, I do want to let you know that this is a lethal diagnosis, which means a lethal diagnosis, a doctor will always allow you to choose to terminate the pregnancy. And because I am a spiritual person, I chose not to give my child up or terminate, and I chose to keep him for as long as would be healthy for me, because with the lethal diagnosis, there are things that might happen, such as stillborn. Their heads can get too big, so you actually can't deliver them naturally. When she told me that, I knew that I wasn't going to go that route. I knew that I was going to carry him for as long as I could and just cherish every little moment I got with him. So I let her know that that wouldn't be an option. We didn't have to discuss it. And she left the room and gave me and my husband some moments just to kind of talk and grieve. And I just knew that moving forward that I was just going to take this in stride and again cherish every moment I got with him. And I let the doctor know that moving forward I would like to come in regularly to get checkups just to make sure that he was doing okay and that I would be able to have him naturally. Once a month I would come in, have a normal ultrasound. They would measure the size of his head and let me know how he was doing. So the day came for a ultrasound, and I was about 28 going on 29 weeks when I was going in for this specific ultrasound. And of course it was the same routine where they would measure the size of his head. Well, while she was doing her measurements, she informed me that it was time for him to come. My emotions were really heightened because I knew I only had a couple days left to enjoy every movement, every kick I felt. Because here's the thing, if it wasn't for medical technology, I would have had no idea that he had this rare genetic disorder, because I was measuring perfectly, I could feel him moving around. Everything was textbook perfect. But because of today's technology, you're able to see if things are wrong at a lot earlier stage. So that night I posted on Facebook and I let all my friends and family know that that following day, which would have been May 29th, that he was going to be coming into this world. And I just begged everyone to pray that he would at least come into the world alive, so that I would just get those moments to tell him how much I loved him. And selfishly, I just wanted to say that he was born alive and that he was here on this earth, and to be able to give him a name and have all the things that I wanted, worldly things, but to me they were just so important. The day came and it was time for us to get induced. I let the doctors know what my goal was, and that my goal was to have a very easy transition of labor so that he would be able to come into the world alive. And so they had specialist doctors come in and they said, okay, well, the best route we could possibly go is to do a really long labor and slowly induce you so that it doesn't put so much pressure on the baby, and that when he comes out, hopefully the end result is that he'll come out alive. The moment came when it was time for me to deliver Calvin. The doctor just told me to go ahead and push through my contractions, and my one last push, he came out.
252.
I could just see the back of his head, and I could tell that he had very severe deformities. And the first thing I asked the doctor is he alive?
Yes.
And the doctor said, yes, he's alive, but I just remember thanking God for allowing him to come into this world and be alive, and I heard him cry.
Yeah, please. I'm so sorry, baby.
And everyone in the room heard him cry. He cried out. And it was just the most magical sound I think any mother has heard when they hear their child for the first time. It was so beautiful and it was so magical. And they of course did everything that they could for him, and then they sat him up on me and just allowed me to have that time with him.
He still has a heart rate. It's just really low, just like before. So that could last for
The nurse would come in periodically and check his heart rate, and she said, yep, he's still alive. And you know, I would ask him if he's suffering, because that was another big concern of mine, is I just wanted to make sure that not only did I get what I wanted, but I wanted him to have as great of an experience as he could, and I didn't want him to suffer or be in any pain. And the nurses assured me that he wasn't in any pain, and that a lot of these times they would just slowly go when it was their time. I don't know if I can handle it when he passes away.
Okay.
So holding my son and having him skin to skin, and me getting to look at him and just admire his little fingers and his little toes, and I got to rub the side of his cheek, which I just remember in that moment when I was rubbing his cheek, it felt like the smoothest velvet. That's one of my biggest memories of seeing him there, and I just felt his spirit so strongly, and all I could do was just quietly whisper how much I loved him and how sorry I was that I couldn't take this pain away from him, or I couldn't take his broken body and fix it. And I think as a mother, all you want to do is protect your child and give them the best of everything. And at that moment, I had to let go and just let God take over completely. We said our goodbyes to Calvin, and my dad and my mom came in, and they were able to give him a beautiful blessing, and my mom was able to come in and see him as well. The nurses took him away, and the next day was just kind of grieving, and I got to bring my kids in and explain to them, you know, what happened to their little brother, and we gave them gifts to kind of celebrate Calvin's birth. And then the time was to start preparing for Calvin's funeral. So we were at Larkin Mortuary, and we just finished up getting all the finishing touches for Calvin's funeral. And I was so excited about that moment because we had picked out everything perfectly, and it was just going to be the most perfect day. And while we were heading out, I got a phone call. And just assumed it was like any other phone call, and I answered, and the nurse on the other line was actually the nurse from the hospital, and she said, "Heather, I'm so sorry, but I have to inform you that you will not be getting your birth certificates or your death certificates for your son Calvin." And it was like somebody literally just hit me with a lightning bolt. Like, I didn't know what to say. I was absolutely stunned, and I was like, "Well, what are you talking about?" And she said, "Well, unfortunately, the paperwork that you signed in the hospital before you were induced voids you getting any certificates of life or death." And she was very apologetic, very sorry, and I hung up the phone with her, and I was just a complete wreck. So right then, I got on the phone with as many people as I possibly could and trying to figure out what was going on. So fast forward, I was able to get a birth certificate and a death certificate for my son. It took a lot of my big mouth making sure to defend myself and getting those certificates. But in the future, I highly recommend anyone who has anything that tells you that you can or cannot do something in regards to your child's life, that you stand up and fight for it. Even though it was one of the hardest things and the most difficult things I had to go through, especially I just lost my son, and I'm planning his funeral, and I'm a very, very strong person most of the time, and I just can't imagine some of these women who are told this information, how they could handle it. And we were able to move on and have the most beautiful funeral. It couldn't have been any more perfect. We had doves that flew off. We had my favorite was the bagpipes playing, and I was able to speak about my son in the moment I got to have with him, and it was just the most beautiful funeral. I can't express into words how grateful I was to even have that. If my son Calvin were with me today, which I know he is always near me in spirit, and I can feel his presence, I would just hope that he knows how much I love him, and I'm so grateful that he chose me to be his mom out of all the moms out there, that I was chosen to be the one who carried him and brought him into this world. And I just hope that I can be a good mom to my other children, so that he could see that that's exactly how I would have raised him. And I look forward to the day where I get to wrap my arms around him in his perfect body and just give him a kiss and just tell him that I love him so much.